Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of The Orthodox Nationalist. Today we're going to deal with a topic that has both personal importance to me as well as broader importance to the Church and the Synod to which I belong. Some of you may have heard that there is a faction, one person in particular, who is trying to get rid of me as a priest in the Synod of the old Synod of Milan, which is the autonomous metropolia. It's got a very long and wieldy name, but this is an effort that's really been very recent. I've only known about it for a couple of weeks. They have scheduled a trial where I am supposed to answer for these terrible crimes of essentially being politically incorrect. These have come out of nowhere. I've been preaching these things for many, many years. Usually anything controversial that I write, I send to my bishop beforehand, and he approves them, and there's no problem there. That's been the case with all of these. And then suddenly, when this occurs, the bishop is no longer a man who has been my spiritual father for 10 years, who's been my father in everything but biology, stops returning my phone calls, and doesn't return emails. Very, very uncharacteristic. The charges against me they concern nationalism, being involved in nationalist political movements, and very, very vague claim that I think the ethnophiletism issue, the so-called nationalism issue in 1872, is overdrawn. These are overwhelmingly matters of fact, not belief. There is no one in the Synod that I belong to who is capable of dealing with these issues. They have no intellectual competence in these areas. And it's very odd because I've been preaching this stuff for a very long time. Some of the people who have decided to get rid of me have been fans of mine over the years and have claimed that they've learned a lot from me. This has come from out of nowhere, and everyone's behaving in a very uncharacteristic way. I'm not entirely surprised, because when you go, you're dealing with these things, in the Old Testament, there are two kinds of prophets. The temple prophets were the conformists. They told the king, monarch, the ruling class what they wanted to hear. They said that their army will be victorious, that they will make big profits, that being involved with the pagans is no problem. Yahweh and Baal are pretty much the same person anyway. This is what they did. This is what the prophets complained about. They were comfortable. They were well off. The real prophets came from out of nowhere. They didn't seem to have any real lineage. They just appeared. They have no backing. They're almost always by themselves. They're almost always involuntary. They don't want to do what, they don't want to go in front of all of Israel and say that you're going to burn. But these people are always, usually they're killed. They're treated very poorly for obvious reason. When Jeremiah goes in front of the assembly and says the Babylonians, the Syrians are coming, and you deserve it. I'm going to be fighting on their side because you have sinned so grievously in this conformity, this desire to conform to the pagan world. In terms of mercantile trade, which always had an economic component, that God is punishing you this way by stirring up one of these powers to conquer Israel. Isaiah, his whole, as one of the few upper-class prophets, condemned any attempt to have an alliance with a greater power, Egypt or Assyria, that those alliances automatically entangle you with the pagan world. You had to trade these symbolic statues of the gods. More proof, by the way, that these were never meant to be understood as individuals. These were symbols. These were encoded messages. The ideology, the science, the literature of a certain people, the constitution, so to speak. And this trading, you sign a treaty that you put the symbol of the other party in your temple. And this is what Solomon did. Isaiah knew that signing an alliance treaty with another power meant that the temple had to have the gods and goddesses of the other power within it in a very prominent place, and he condemned this. And he went further than that, and he said that no alliance is permissible with anyone. We rely on God only. It doesn't matter how great the odds are. And that's always the situation. Every time you deal with the church, any political society, you have the temple prophets and you have the actual prophets. And that's a similar case here. Because I've come under attack for one reason only. And that is that I baptized Matthew Heinbeck, who is a very good Orthodox young guy, a family man, who has, because of this, suffered tremendously on a personal level. The people bringing these charges against me, of course, don't really care about me. They're trying to get rid of him. And so, figuring if they go after me, the standard is lower. The burden of proof is much lower for them. They get rid of me, Matt Heinbeck will follow. So nothing here is honest. Nothing here is canonical. What I received, the summons I received in the mail from the court is very vague. They've never done this before. They've never seen actually what a summons is supposed to look like. It has to be done in a certain way. It has to be in formal language. There has to be very specific charges, and then the canon or the doctrine, which is being violated. Then I have to list the times where they have attempted to have me corrected, and I refused. And it has to be a long, very standardized kind of thing. Well, they're new to this. I also don't think that their heart is in it. They're serving at the behest of somebody else. And I don't believe that they're entirely voluntary in doing this. Because a lot of these people have been my friends for a very long time, and all of a sudden are attacking doctrines that they've known about in my case for many, many years. So the entire thing is very suspicious. So that's a simple issue. I'm not entirely sure what the charges are because they're not stated in any kind of a formal way. They're very, very vague. Being involved in nationalist politics, for example, is not a canonical infraction. Believing that ethnophiletism is that no one really believes that doctrine that's laid out in the very brief condemnation by the Synod in 1872. That's a matter of fact, not a belief. That in terms of this name worship stuff, now this is something for those of you who don't know. It's embarrassing really to talk about this. The Orthodox people will fight about anything, and if they don't have something to fight about, they'll invent one. They'll invent a reason. And here's one of these things. Name worship. I first came across it in graduate school, and I was reading a paper, The Quenchers of the Spirit by Berdayev, and I hear about it for the first time there, and he describes what this name worship idea is. And the claim is, and he doesn't say this, but this is the claim that my bishop, Metropolitan John, has stated and has been condemned in the past, that the name of God is itself God. That the word God can be predicated to both God himself and the name. In which case you're talking about one and the same thing. And I first came across this, and I said, do people actually believe this? That the name itself, the words on a piece of paper, the vibrations in the air when you speak it, that this is the same thing as God appearing, say, in the Eucharist, or appearing on earth. That's the argument. It's not a symbolic matter. It is these people allegedly believe that the name that we use to express God, if done in a certain context with faith, is in fact God present. And the first thing that occurred to me when I heard about this crazy doctrine was it sounded like a priestless old believer idea. That maybe there's a faction who thinks that the end times are coming very, very soon, and there won't be a lot of legitimate bishops around. So God in his mercy is permitting a way that you can kind of have the sacraments without the sacrament. Revealing this doctrine. I wouldn't accept it that way anyway, but that's as close as I could come to making sense out of this. Now, this concept is tearing churches apart. And it's only been in the last maybe 2 years that I've finally, I've been trying to avoid this issue because on the surface it seems so stupid. And it really is. I started reading about this in the original, because most of the stuff has not been translated. So if you don't know the language, you don't know what's going on. And I discovered that no one, in fact, believes that the name of God is God. Now, the synod that I belong to, we used to be a part of a much larger church. We were connected with Angelos of Athens and Raphael, the catacomb bishop, the catacomb group synod in Moscow. All told, probably about 400 parishes, several thousand monastics. It was quite an institution, and we were growing. And in fact, that intercommunion, that larger church, was the blueprint for other groups to join in and to begin consolidating our forces, which was a tremendous move. No one had really heard of Raphael before, and I came across him reading Ukrainian because his canonical background is through the Ukrainian autocephalous. And rather than going through the various Russian factions, he went through Methodius and Dmitry Yerema, the Patriarch of Kiev, coming ultimately from Antioch, and the Tomos of Independence that was granted to the Church of Poland in 1924, which was mostly a Ukrainian group. And I thought it was a good move on their part. There's certainly nothing wrong with that background. And he was able to avoid all the pitfalls in Russian life and have a completely fresh and really unquestionable canonical background from Antioch. And he was a very small group, and I brought him to the attention of our metropolitan archbishop at the time. And I said, we have this Ukrainian background. He has this Ukrainian background. We can approach him. And the metropolitan, and we got the ball rolling. And before you know it, this became a substantial. And then all of a sudden, now everyone's talking about Raphael. And I'm very happy that I was able to do that and to bring him out. He's a good man. But now, because of a series of very disastrous missteps, that church has now fallen apart. And we are now isolated. A handful of parishes in America and Canada, and the Greeks and the Russian faction now are in communion with each other, but not with us. Now, what happened here? Archbishop John actually was Metropolitan John at the time, had issued an anathema against this name-worshipping idea. Now, if anyone out there believes this idea, they should be anathematized. I'm pretty sure that outside of a sanitarium, no one really believes that. But if they did, and just in case that people are taking this very literally and believe that, it should be noted. Of course, if you believe that doctrine, then there's no reason for you to have sacraments or even be in a church. There'd be no point of it. So those who believe this doctrine and still have bishops and sacraments obviously don't mean it in the way that we accuse them of meaning it. And an anathema was written that accused Metropolitan Raphael of dabbling in the Kabbalah. And I think what they meant by that, again, there's no one in the Synod who's really competent to make those kind of accusations, and certainly at this very complicated, arcane symbolism. So it's a pretty nasty thing to say. And of course, Raphael is offended by this Kabbalah, and I think the reference was to the gematria, the use of numbers and letters to peer deeper and deeper into reality. These are icons. These are fundamental ontological categories. And you go further than that, and these unite all objects, and sympathetic magic can connect all things under one form and everything like that. You have to know the metaphysics. I do. No one else in our synod does. And so they insulted the guy. He doesn't really believe that. So he was essentially called an occultist, clearly a heretic, and that he was dabbling in the worship of numbers and letters and had somehow fallen into the occult. And I didn't see this until much later. I wasn't really paying attention. And I wasn't told about it. And I only found out relatively recently about this exchange. Raphael then responds and says, you have the wrong idea. We need to we have to hold a council, and we'll get this all straightened out. You must be hearing this incorrectly. I wish I had been paying closer attention. I would be able to intervene, but I really wasn't. I had other problems at the time, and our church never attended the council, and so we had anathematized each other. We anathematized each other over nothing. They what we believe is name worship is not in fact what they hold to. It's far more complicated than that. Put it in a simple way. The simplest way to put it is as a distinction between realism and nominalism. Now, automatically, you're way out of the purview of most of the people who are making judgments on this stuff. The simplest way I could put it without getting involved in ontology at all is that the terms like word and name don't refer to today what they referred to 1,000 years ago. Today we simply use a term like someone's name or the name of a thing just as a very casual way to describe something, almost an abbreviation. That wasn't always the case. In a society that's more Platonic, the knowledge is ethereal and separated from the changing world of matter, a name was a symbol. Now the word symbol has a meaning today that's almost the complete opposite of what it used to mean. A symbol is a gateway. A symbol is not the opposite of substance as we use it today, but it was your first step into leaving the changing flux of matter and moving into the realm of actual truth. Because if something is true, it can't change. If it can't change, it can't be material. That was a very simple Platonic argument. So a name or a word is far more than just a way that we refer to something. It's connected with the object. It's connected with the object because our own rational faculty and whatever object that we're dealing with are essentially one and the same. It's all one substance, very tightly interconnected. It's all part of creation. The human mind is created concurrently with the thing that it's working on. They're not foreign to one another. This was, Alexei Losev's idea and Floresky, and it's very common, Frank's idea in late 19th century, early 20th century Russian metaphysics. This was a very common idea. The Enlightenment idea separated the human person from the natural world around it, as if the human ego wasn't natural. Rather, it was this mechanism that was able to dominate from above the natural order. And the intuitive idea was that the self is as much a part of the created order as anything else, and therefore is automatically commensurate with everything around it. Therefore, what it does is not arbitrary. These may be conventional signs and symbols we use to describe things, but they're arbitrary ones. There's two very different things. No one is claiming that the name and the object are one and the same. No one's ever said that. No one's ever said that the name comes before the object. We have to be very careful when we use these terms. The word, the term, has a tremendous metaphysical history. Today, it's used just to refer to something that I'm speaking right now. It's conventional sounds that we've all been socialized to understand. And really nothing more than that. But of course, up until the rise of industrialization and nominalism, the word was this very structure of reality. This was deep in the Old Testament as well as the patristic era. This was something almost taken for granted, with the exception of more extreme atomists and people like that. The simplest way to put it is the word that we use to describe something is indicative of our knowledge of it. That there's a commensurability between our description of something and that object, whatever it is. That name is a symbol It's a gateway into reality, objectively speaking, and your first step into the realm of truth. Now, as it refers to theology, it simply means that the conceptual apparatus that we use to describe the truths of God are grace-filled. These aren't arbitrary inventions. They may be conventional, but they are certainly not arbitrary. These are ways that God himself has revealed that we could make sense as limited as we are with this ethereal world. They're not mere inventions. Vladimir Ernst's condemnation of the philosophy behind the 1913 Russian Synod's condemnation is actually very good, because it suggests, and I've read it both in Russian and English, and it suggests that the conceptual apparatus that we use to describe God is completely invented. It doesn't mean that God doesn't exist. It just means that this is completely an arbitrary set of sounds. You see this in Father John Romandidis. I mentioned this in my article on the question on the website, my website, rushjournal.org, and it's been spread around as well, that I never understood how this man has not been condemned. He's been dead for a while now, but he actually makes the argument, and I cite him many times, that there is no point of commensurability between God and man. There is this eternal schism between heaven and earth. And he says it. I was hoping that maybe he meant this, he was trying to make another point, or he was being metaphorical. No, he really means that. In which case, the way that we pray, or the liturgy and the icons and everything else, these could be changed at will. These are just arbitrary signs that we use. They could have been very different. Maybe the same truth would be expressed, just in a very different way. We believe that the words and the gestures and the concept, these things in the liturgy are far more than just linguistic. That these are commensurate with the reality of the spirit of angels and saints and God himself, at least in his energies. Energy and grace are one and the same. It's simply God's presence. It's God's power. That's all it is. There's one energy. There's one grace that God's manifested at Tabor and at the resurrection. And the church points it out to us and gives us an example of what we have to do to be able to experience it more fully. Eden has been recreated in the church. Paradise exists. But we're too full of ourselves and too egocentric, too fragmented, too unfaithful to be able to experience it. I've always said in this show for years, I think little kids and certain animals experience it. Little kids see a lot more than we do. They're not brainwashed yet. They're not canalized into operations and language and this and they're not tethered to the ground. They hear things. They see things. They're innocent, and so the hang-ups haven't developed yet. And the most painful time of my life, the single most painful time of my life, was when my kids lost that connection, as we all did. When you hit puberty. Puberty is just a recapitulation of the fall of Adam. It's the exact same thing. Adam and Eve start weaving clothing. Kids become obsessed with their appearance. They change. They start to degenerate for a while. They're alienated from their parents. They want to be separate from their parents. They want to be, they're not quite sure what they are. They know what they're not, maybe, but they don't know what they are. If they're not, they're very confused. Parts of their bodies don't grow in the same way. The chemistry is going wild. This is very much the same thing. Chaos is introduced into the world of nature. Now, thank God my kids weren't that bad, unlike me. My kids did a very good job in passing through that torment. Actually, it really wasn't much work at all, which just shows you what we could do with a strong family and a church structure, and just being rational about it. And the point I'm trying to make is human beings are fragmented. We're constantly striving for this Edenic connection, an intuitive connection without words, without concepts, between the grace of God and our being. That's very, very hard to do. Only the greatest of saints have reached that, even just for a short period of time. But I do think certain children have it. Even some people who are called mentally ill, I think, have that connection. But there's no way to express that in modern life, and so they sound like nut jobs. They're not. Some of them might actually have this intuitive connection. How can such a person express that without sounding like a psychotic? And my kids used to hear things during the liturgy. They heard angels singing, and they heard things. They're not making that up. They didn't have anything to gain by saying that. I heard that for years from different kids over the years, including myself, and it disappears after a while. Maybe even the idea that I shouldn't say something like that. It doesn't sound cool. It doesn't sound right to say that. Well, I didn't hear the angels anymore. That was, it was a miserable, miserable day. And puberty is the fall. So when the fall occurs, human beings are forced to use concepts, words, logic that's further and further away from the actual reality that they're trying to describe. Christ comes to earth, brings the truth with him, identifies himself as the Word. He reopens that, and he provides us with a whole new vocabulary, a way to think about God, because he's become man and therefore very accessible to us. You can't talk about God before that in any real sense. But now that God has become a human being, he has created his own vocabulary. You can talk about him now, because he's now commensurate with our experience. The way that's been described, whether it be liturgically or canonically, those aren't arbitrary sounds. Those aren't arbitrary expressions. This is why you can't change the liturgy. This is why you can't decide that every liturgy go do whatever you want. That would be the case if Roman Didas is right, if nominalism is correct. Then these are all just arbitrary signs. They might be true. They may point to the truth. But a lot of things could be express that same truth. God resurrecting from the dead, there's a lot of ways to express that. And I could do it in smoke signals. I could do it in interpretive dance. I could do it in anything. Any arbitrary thing I could come up with to express that truth. But we don't do that. Because the conceptual operative liturgy, the ritual, these are tightly connected with natural law. These are tightly connected with God's revelation. They're grace. They're filled with grace. It is a step in the direction of an intuitive connection with God. Now, I describe that to you very, very quickly. And I'm here to tell you that the people who are making judgments on this have absolutely no competence whatsoever in an area. You're talking about some of the far reaches of ontology. Let me give you an example here. And I have this in one of my papers, and it drove me crazy. And I couldn't believe it. And this man, he was a priest. He may be a good guy in other respects. His Father Paniotis, and he is criticized on Hockney's site, and I agree with that particular criticism. Here's what he says. He's talking about what name worshippers actually believe. So I'm quoting him here. Many of these name worshippers argued that, since according to the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, the name of the object exists before the object itself does, so the name of God must pre-exist before the world was created, and that the name, therefore, can't be anything but God himself. Among other things, this was thought to mean that knowledge of the secret name of God alone allows one to perform miracles. A similar concept exists in the Jewish Kabbalah and in Buddhism. End quote. I did a facepalm there for about 10 minutes when I first read this ludicrous attempt at being intellectual. I have spent 25 years poring over the work of the Platonists. This man, to be nice about it, has not. Every sentence is incorrect. I think I know what he's trying to say. He's trying to make the argument that name worshippers actually worship letters and sounds and vibrations in the air, and the eardrum when it gets provoked by those vibrations, and the communication, the electric communication between the eardrum and the brain, and how that then gets reinterpreted into symbols that we can understand. All of that must therefore be God, in the same sense that God is God, the same sense that God exists in the Eucharist, for example, or in the Church itself. Now, I'm telling you, if I find someone who actually believes that, you need to call a sanitarium, get this man committed, check him for tumors, because there's something wrong with the man. No one believes the garbage here that Paniotis is putting out. I don't even know where to begin. No one has ever argued that the name of something exists prior to the object. What he might mean there is that referring to the realm of forms, that is more significant. That's more foundational than is more foundational than a particular manifestation of that form. I don't think he understands that, but if you're going in that direction, I get it. By the word name, he's actually referring to a form, an archetype, in which case he would be correct, but I don't think he knows he's correct. And he's not put in a way that's coherent. I also think he means the word before, chronologically speaking. And it's non sequitur anyway, because if the name exists before the object, then the name of God must exist before God. Well, he can't say that, so he says before creation. So the parallel is gone anyway. Then he says that in understanding God's name, which is God, you can somehow command him. Now he's confusing a bunch of different things. He's actually talking about the arcane idea of sympathetic magic. You understand the form of something, you then can command all the things that form exists in reference to. He doesn't know that, but it sounds like that's kind of, he has a half-digested idea that that's kind of where he's going, but he doesn't really know how to express it. And I think that's where my synod got the idea because Raphael's a name worshiper, therefore he believes that. And so, well, he doesn't, of course, because no one believes that. Certainly an Orthodox person believes that. The problem is that you're dealing now with an ideology, a way of thinking that's very complicated and very abstruse. And you have to know the vocabulary, and it's a highly technical vocabulary. If you don't know your Plato and Aristotle and Plotinus, shut up. Because guys like Panayotis are poisoning the well. And you have a situation where, through no fault of their own, a metropolitan accused Raphael of being involved in the Jewish arcana. He's not. I asked him initially, I said, please give me evidence that this man is doing that. It's right in the anathema. Please send me something. I've read everything. I can't find anything that he says that. That was almost 2 years ago. I received no answer. I've poured through the texts of these guys. I can't find anything like that. So I came to the conclusion that, while it's true, if anyone did believe that, they should be condemned. I don't think anyone does. It's far more complicated than that. And it comes from this constant confusion that people don't know the difference between the modern conception of a word like name or word and the ancient conception of that terminology, name and word. Very, very, very different things. We live in a world, the industrial world, where the elite, the titans of industry control what's real and what's not. There is no actual creation. There's no actual reality. They use words to pin down the flux that's out there. They decide what's real. Industry takes the natural creation, which of course is worthless, according to John Locke, and turns it into something that they could use, therefore giving it value and truth and worth. It's the human mind that gives value, not creation. Creation itself is dead. Only industry, only the elite, the initiated can give value to something. We're born and raised in that society, as we all are. We all are hardwired there. It's very difficult to break out of the notion. So this isn't a moral failing on anyone's part. But the fact is that condemnation destroyed this intercommunion, insulted a bunch of people who didn't believe those things. And then when he requested a meeting, he was refused. Now I realize, I've noticed recently that anathema has been rewritten. And the reference to the Kabbalah has been removed. And now it says something like arcane desires. Now that's a very odd procedure to change how this thing is written. And so what was a very promising, tremendous, a large and growing church is now in tatters. And no one has taken responsibility for this. It still could be fixed. But no one's doing that. It's not because there's anyone who wants to, they're not doing this on purpose. They're not horrible people. But they had a very severe, a very dangerous misunderstanding. They're involved in a territory they have no right to be in. And they're making these judgments using a highly technical vocabulary in a field that I know extremely well, but most people don't. Of course, I was the last person that they spoke to about this, And they ended up making a terrible faux pas. I don't think even now they realize what they've done. I ended up poring over. I went through all of the great, the Iludor and Bulutovich, and I read all their works in the original. I can't find anything like this. In fact, they condemn the idea. In my paper on the topic, I quote them over and over again, my own translations here, where they say, we don't believe that stuff. Only crazy people would believe that. Now, if that's true, all of this has to be redone. All this has to be taken back and restructured. I think the main problem is you have people like Father Panagiotis, who pretend to know, who don't know. They think that words that, Plato and Aristotle used 2,500 years ago mean the same thing that they do now. A word is just some arbitrary way that we communicate with someone. It's not the case. That's certainly not what they believe. And the butchery that I just read to you shows you just how this misunderstanding from people who don't have the competence to deal with this area, how they can be destroyed, how they can convince people that they're Raphael or someone else, that they're doing the gematria there in the vestibule of the church, and how this stuff can get these things can be spun before you know it. They're initiated into an occult organization, all based on this misunderstanding. And usually, when this is described as what I've just described to you, most people are saying, "What the hell are you talking about?" So that's that issue. There's obviously nothing there. That's not the issue anyway. They don't really care about that. But that's that. More to the point is, of course, the idea of phyllotism. I also have a paper on this. I'm working on a more detailed version of it. This is another very serious problem. There's no historian specializing in the Balkans at the time that will tell you that the church was not essentially a group of businessmen who were buying sees, buying dioceses. That's how you became a bishop. You had to buy it. There was a standardized price list. So you went to the Fanar, you went to Jewish money lenders, you took out a huge amount. You gave it to the Turkish authorities or the middlemen. And sometimes people weren't even monks. They weren't anything. They were investors. And then they would, they'd never go to their diocese, but they would then have to use force to extract as many taxes and fees as possible so as to pay back their creditors and make a profit on top of it. The fact is that most bishops at the time were like this. The Patriarchate was no different. It was a terribly dark time for the church. There are very, very few standout bishops of the era. The entire Tricocrati, outside of a few Patriarchs of Constantinople, most people couldn't name 2 bishops. Of course, there were exceptions to this, but most of these men were Simoniac. Now, when the nationalist movements developed, these Orthodox movements developed to throw the Turks out, the Orthodox world was overjoyed. Finally, the Christians are getting their act together here. But Bulgarians and others notice that in their territory, they're all Greeks, very corrupt, sometimes not even Christians. They rule their sees as Greek nationalists, or investors, or corrupt clerics, and they want them out. Well, the minute the nationalist movement is going to grow and say we can't have Greek speakers and phony bishops in our areas, the threat of kicking them out means they're never going to get their money back. They can't pay back Fanar. All the Bulgarian Exarchate was the idea in a very specific territory where the overwhelming majority of the people spoke the language, that you have to get rid of these Simoniac bishops who have no right to be there. There's no canonical validity to their see whatsoever. Even if there was, they have nothing but contempt for the Slavic population. They treat them like cattle. They don't even speak the language. They have no connection with them whatsoever. They need to be able to speak the language of the people. This was an outrage. And the Fanar went into a panic. A lot of this was done. The initial permission to do this came from the Sultan, although, of course, the Sultan wasn't writing, at his desk. His Greek scribes were doing this. So it was a Greek group that did it. The Sultan had no interest in that. He wasn't going to write his own, like he's sitting there, with his quill writing this stuff for people. That's not how it worked. He had his Greeks write out this, what they call a firman, that laid out that there should be an independent Bulgarian church, like there is today. Remember, a lot of these Greeks were saying that there is no Bulgarian ethnicity at the time. But there are no such things. This is an invention. In 1872, a handful of these Fanoir businessmen got together and had what they called the Pan-Orthodox Council. And they said some very strange things. They didn't condemn nationalism. They didn't condemn really much of anything. They said that the claim that there are different ethnic groups in the Balkans is hereby condemned. That's what it says. Now, I don't know Greek. I only see the English translation, but that's what it says. The claim that there are a diversity of races, or at least that those diversity of races has any theological significance, is condemned. That's it. Now, people have extrapolated from that. If you go search for that online, what you'll get is these Greek Masons going on saying, well, racism has been condemned. Conservatism has been condemned. They'll extrapolate this into anything that they don't like, then becomes phyllotism. I think what they're getting at, although they don't say this explicitly, is that what is being condemned is that an ethnic group cannot form a church only for itself. Which, of course, is idiotic. And no one's done that. The Bulgarians certainly were not claiming that. The Greeks never asked and weren't interested. They needed something to condemn. They needed to stop this. If the Bulgarians were going to actually kick these people out, first of all, the fact that they had no right to be there was going to be exposed, number one. Number two, these guys would not be able to get their money back. You're talking about bankruptcy. So this phyllotism thing was nonsense at that level. Now, just like in the name worship thing, what they did condemn, or what I think they implied, is something worth condemning. Anyone who says that we create a church only for Russians living in Kiev, and that's it. And if you're from Saratov, if you're from Archangelsk, well, forget it. You're gone. Now, I'm sure at some time or another someone like that's existed. I've never come across anyone like that. I'm an Irishman who came into the Ukrainian church years ago. Obviously, that wouldn't have worked for me. Now, it's often very odd. With ethnic parish, someone comes in from off the street, doesn't speak the language, it's a little weird. You got to wonder, are you in the right place? That's what they said to me. But after a while, they realized my motivation, and I became a part of the family. I had to give too. I had to learn the language. I had to do my own part. And we became very close, actually. That's how that goes. But there's never been anyone who says, if you're not Greek, get out of here. If there is someone who says that, send me the quote, please. I guarantee I'm not going to hear from anyone. People get emotional, angry, and they make these sweeping statements. Pretty sure no one's saying that. So it was another straw man. So here you have two councils referring to heresies that, if they did exist, would in fact be heresy. But they don't. No one believes that the name of God is God in that sense, we've discussed. And no one believes that the Bulgarian Exarchate was only for Bulgarians, and if you speak Hungarian and you want to convert, you can't come to our church. That's ridiculous. I might note that the entire Orthodox world condemned the Synod of Constantinople, 1872. Russia was quite vehement about it. The most vehement was Jerusalem, who said this is ridiculous. The only man, I think it was Parthenios of Alexandria, made the argument that I've made, that it's your corrupt businessmen who are afraid of going bankrupt. That's why this nonsense has been passed. The Bulgarians have done nothing wrong. They were in communion with the Russian church consistently. Russians never recognized that synod. The Serbs never recognized that synod. The Romanians never recognized that synod. Now, I believe after the Bolshevik Revolution, there was a tacit acceptance of it, because Moscow began using that language to condemn Ukraine. So all of a sudden, that interpretation of what phyllotism might be was useful to them. It never meant nationalism. It's not translated that way. It never meant racism. But it was this kind of irrational idea that the ethnic idea is far more important than the Christian idea. Now that I know exists, although they don't organize churches that way. Again, if they exist, please send me the Constitution and the quotations where they're saying this. Again, you can't find them because they don't exist. Here you find the occasional nut job who does, but he's a nut job. They say all kinds of crazy things. But are these the issues here? This is why they want to try me? Of course not. I've been saying this stuff for a long time. I've been doing this radio show since 2008 or something like that. I've been saying the same things over and over again. No, Matt Heimbeck came into our synod. Matt Heimbeck has done nothing wrong. He's a fully Orthodox man. I helped catechize him. And he's been kicked out of every Orthodox group he's ever been in. Why? Because people are scared. They're scared they're going to be called names. They're scared of the Jews. They're scared that the newspapers are going to say, oh, they're a racist body because Matt Heimbeck went to their church one time. They're cowards. What could be more politically incorrect than the true Orthodox Church? We're outcasts by definition. These are our people. The politics that Matthew and I hold directly come from the prophets, who were both nationalists in terms of their ethnicity and socialists in a very broad, idealistic sense in terms of economics. Read the prophets. There's a reason they're not being read. There's a very good reason why they're not being read. Because you never look at the world the same way again. All of a sudden, you wonder, how come the canons on usury don't get referred to very much? The sexual stuff gets talked about all the time, and ecumenism sometimes, but when it comes to economic areas, no one ever talks about it. The Church Fathers condemn private property en masse, with very few exceptions. All of a sudden, they don't care about the Church Fathers anymore. That's odd. How can they be selective like this? The prophets will give the answer. The Canadian, a handful of Canadians had come into our synod, I believe it was just a few years ago, led by a Bishop Joseph Royer. And he came into the group, and it was okay. Then Matt came in, and then for some reason, so I've heard, he panicked. He was outraged that a Nazi had come into the church. Now, it's a stupid thing to say, and all he needed to do was write me and ask me, or him, for that matter. It's very suspicious that he's not done that. There's a good reason why he didn't do that. I get phone calls, panic phone calls from the bishop. We can't have this, we can't have... I said, we can't have what? Well, he believes that we got to kick non-whites out. I say, no, he doesn't. Where'd you hear that from? Well, the newspaper said that. The Washington Post said that. The Washington Post, they're your authority? What, we just fall off the turnip truck? They lie about our people all the time. What are you talking about? He doesn't believe that. Well, somehow, Joseph Royer takes it upon himself to be the moral compass of our little tiny synod. 2 priests now have told me that he is helping to finance the monastery of the Holy Name. It makes sense because we've lost 2 sources of income. The deaths of Father Brendan and Father Paisius have cut the income drastically. I believe that the All Saints Church at the Cathedral is the largest in our group, and they have threatened to cut him off unless Matthew goes. Now this is very odd, because again, Matt doesn't believe what this Joseph Royer thinks that he does, and when he's told that, he doesn't believe you. Again, all this could have been cleared up with an email to me, but he's not about to do that. Well, I went to his website, and the first thing that I noticed is that he is talking about how wonderful it is that his church reflects the diversity of all of Canada. And the rainbow of different races and peoples are in there. Well, that's nice and very trendy, but that has nothing to do with the church. There is no reference to the true Orthodox Church in that website. There is nothing of any historical value. There is no reference to ecumenism, or liberalism, or modernism, whatsoever. If you look at his history, he has gone from, in fairly recent times, from a Uniate, and then he went to the Greek Church. He got kicked out of there for going to the altar and serving without permission, or at least as far as what I could read from his from his description of himself. And then he went into a very liberal, very eccentric, Trotskyite, autocephalous Western Right group that comes from the rebellion against the union of the Polish Church with the 1921 group. Gregory Wałczuk was one of these people who created this alternative synod, which is where the church that he belonged to, very, very liberal. They had married bishops and everything. And for some reason, that wasn't working out. I don't know why. And he joined, oddly enough, us. The true Orthodox Church that has nothing in common with that autocephalous group under under Gregory. When Theodorovich went under the Polish Church and received the proper canonical foundation, there was a protest, the so-called 1921, a handful of them. And they became this sort of new Orthodox married bishop type. There's only a handful of them. And this, this Western Right group, although I don't think he does the Western Right, they have just a few people. He was a part of that for a while. He became a bishop for them in 2004, and then decides to come into the Traditionalists, which means either, he had a radical change of heart from extreme ecumenism to extreme anti-ecumenism, or he just didn't have anywhere to go. And he came into a group that's very small, cash-strapped, and I'm noticing that Bishop Joseph becomes very powerful. He has been designated Metropolitan John's successor. No one's been told this. There's been no vote or anything. That's how it's going to be. The political statement that came in reference to me on the Synod's website about the political the wonderful diversity that we have to all have in our little tiny churches that went up a few months ago. He authored that. I've criticized that in public. It's illiterate. This Bishop Joseph doesn't seem to have any functional knowledge in any of these areas. He has one political thing on there. He says, everything you need to know about Islamic terrorism. I read this thing. It's a few paragraphs. He doesn't say anything. And he has a citation in there. And he has a link there, in fact, the Clarion Institute. The Clarion Institute is a major Zionist front. It takes money from Mossad and Shin Bet and promotes this neocon American exceptionalism, the Zionist idea, and in fact that group is on his side more than once. Other than that, there's nothing of value on there. You can't pin him down on anything. There's very little in terms of theology. I don't know what to make of it. He doesn't seem to have any abiding principles. He goes from one church to another. And now he comes in, apparently, from what I've heard, has given money to the Metropolitan and threatens to leave like a child because he thinks that there's a Nazi here, and the Nazi doesn't belong here. And that's not even true. And it could have been cleared up with a phone call. And he makes a scene, and now the Metropolitan John, who has been my spiritual father for 10 years, now has to choose between financial stability and me. It was an outrageous thing for Joseph to do. Threatening to leave and to apparently take his money with him. All of a sudden, Joseph is now his successor, is writing things on the site, is that he won't take it down, even though he promised me he would. Metropolitan John promised me he would. Metropolitan John seems to be confused. His health is deteriorating. I don't know to what extent Bishop Joseph is running things. I simply don't know. I'm not there. The fact that he could force this trial over nothing, hide behind Father Enoch, who's been a friend of mine for many years, and who's known this stuff about me, and all of a sudden now has to go digging for things. And all this could have been done with a phone call or an email. And he hasn't done that. Now he's put the Metropolitan in a terrible position. The relationship between Metropolitan John, who is my father, and everything of biology has been shattered. Matthew Heimbach is a wreck because of this, and the poor guy has done nothing wrong. And all this from somebody who seems to have no functional knowledge in any of these political or social things, who goes from church to church and who seems to get his way by threatening to leave and whatever, whether it be money or something else, has the bishop very upset. My bishop, Metropolitan John. And this guy's been in the synod all of a few years. There's something wrong here. These are simply the facts that I understand. It's the only explanation that makes all of this make sense. Metropolitan said, I said to him, look, if there's a problem with something I said, why didn't you simply mention it to me? In which case, I would have fixed it. Nothing. Silence. What's the problem here? This trial gets forced down my throat. They're trying to get rid of Matt. It's harder to get rid of a layman than get rid of me. So this thing is a farce. It's dishonest. It has no foundation in reality. And the person, from what I understand, who has been at the root of this, is hiding behind others. And from what I could see from his website, is a liberal on many issues. And as he should be, coming from the groups that he's come out of. I don't see anything there that he's had this radical epiphany that now he is a true Orthodox anti-ecumenical royalist all of a sudden. I don't see that. The autocephalous group in Ukraine, which I'm very familiar with, is certainly anything but that. Michael Champion and that group of people who claim to be connected with Methodian in Kiev had no connection with him whatsoever. So now there's confusion, public scandal, devastated people. Matthew Heimbeck has brought to me over 100 people. Over 100 people looking for instruction in the Orthodox faith. I can't keep up with the number of people that this guy has brought to me. How many has Bishop Joseph brought in? How many converts is he getting? Or anybody else for that matter? And his reward is contempt, backbiting, rumor mongering, lying, going behind everyone's back. And this is outrageous behavior. The very fact that it could have been solved by an email and a couple of questions, and it wasn't, suggests, of course, there's got to be another agenda. If I am incorrect here, I doubt I am. I may be incorrect in certain details, but you have to explain to me how this has come to pass, all of a sudden. And friends of mine all of a sudden are being forced to turn their backs on me. Metropolitan hasn't returned my phone calls because he's ashamed of himself. He doesn't want to be doing this. He doesn't want to have to be forced to choose. And now he's had health problems. He's struggling a little bit. And he's weaker than before. And this is all he needs. He's lost two close friends of his, Father Brendan, Father Paisius, his mother, not quite 2 years ago. And now his relationship with me, very close, for many years has now been shattered because of this. All because of some rumor that Matt Heimbeck is not liberal enough for Bishop Joseph. What's going to happen, I'm not sure. All I said here is the truth of the matter. From what I've read, what I've understood, what I've been told, it's the only thing that makes any sense. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I really doubt I am. And if I am wrong, it's their fault anyway, because there's been absolutely no communication. No one has told me anything. I've gotten these vague accusations on these very strangely abstract theological matters that aren't even stated properly and not even competently explained without any chance to correct these alleged problems. So right now things are in chaos and in flux, and what I've been told is the fault of one man. Well, this will be the last that I'm speaking of this nonsense. Whatever happens, happens. I'm, of course, willing to listen. I'm willing to forgive everybody, and vice versa. I doubt that that's going to happen, though. But my door is always open. It's always been open. This is what happens in a society ruled by the left, ruled by political correctness, ruled by the likes of George Soros. This is the kind of pain that we have to deal with, and there's been a lot of damage done because of this nonsense. Thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.